Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to, or this afternoon or this evening, whenever you're actually taking time to watch our presentation here. Welcome, and here we are. Fall has arrived, and many growers are well into harvest or wrapping up harvest here across Canada, Eastern Canada. Obviously, we're getting into the corn, soybeans as well in the U.S. Corn soybean harvest is underway. So thanks for taking some time. Hopefully we won't take any more than 45 minutes to an hour of your time here to hopefully provide some information on a newer technology in agriculture, obviously Crystal Green. I'm sure you've heard about it, but as we enter fall and into winter with the way the whole commodity markets have gone with crops, and obviously with what's going on in the fertilizer industry, and I think every grower is going to want to dive into their agronomy a little deeper as we head into fall and understand what they have to work with, what are the best solutions for their acres for 2022. And we know that, when we look at a technology, a sustainable solution like Crystal Green, that we believe it is an absolute perfect fit, not just for 2022, but any growing season. When we look at demands of phosphorus, if you think like a plant and how important this nutrient is. So today, obviously, we're very thankful to have Dr. Roland Leatherwood with us here from Ostara. Dr. Roland Leatherwood is actually based out of Columbus, Ohio, and he is the Director of Agronomy and Innovation with Ostara to actually give us some insight into obviously the technology Crystal Green, but also look at phosphorus a little deeper and how important it is in plant production, plant growth, and in all reality, from our perspective, I mean, we look at this and we talk about phosphorus, how important it is to life on this earth. And, the conundrum that we actually see here today is that, nothing on earth survives, nothing living on earth survives without phosphorus as an element or a nutrient to support life. And yet we also are in this era of society where, we look at phosphorus as a potential pollutant. And that's because we've treated it poorly. We need it to grow crops, produce food, feed animals. And yet here we are, we consume that as a nutrient in the food we eat as humans, and we end up compiling it in spots that bring no value. And a lot of the phosphorus today ends up in a waste form in waterways. And thankfully with Ostara, coming up with the technology in conjunction with UBC, ways to capture that and put it back into a usable state where we can recycle or reuse that nutrient, which is so important. So for today's purpose, what we want to get through is obviously Crystal Green, the technology, how it works. We want to dive in a little bit around nutrient efficiency. And this is a nutrient that is so important, and yet it is so challenged when you put it in certain environments, certain soils, and it makes it very tough for plants to actually get. Does it or doesn't it fit your acres? We'll get into that. And there's obviously some agronomic explanation behind that whole mindset. And that's with Dr. Leatherwood on, I think what intrigued us, 4 or 5 years ago is, the amount of work that was done on this technology to a point where we could actually say we kind of have a pretty good idea on where it doesn't fit. And when you get to that level, then I think you really start to define the science and then focus our time on where it does bring the best value for growers. We'll talk about some of the top tips when using it, and then we'll discuss at the end a little bit about what is available for the coming season, and if it's something you think you want to look at or incorporate into your practice, we're here to help. So with that, we'll get into the presentation. So when you look at Crystal Green, I think we talk about it as a technology. It has a brand, but in all reality, this is a nutrient spectrum and has an analysis. It's a 5-28-0-10. The 10% is magnesium, and in all reality, that is part of the technology of actually extracting phosphorus out of wastewater. When you look at how Ostara built the Pearl reactors, really part of that technology is actually injecting magnesium into an effluent stream to actually capture that phosphorus molecule, crystallize it, and then as that crystal builds, pull that phosphorus and magnesium out as a harvested prill, and that's where Crystal Green actually comes from. So in its rawest form, I mean, we would consider this struvite. I mean, struvite is basically magnesium phosphate. But what you end up with is an element spectrum that is actually hanging on to the phosphorus. And so if you take that element spectrum, magnesium phosphate, that is actually a spectrum that is water insoluble. Most of the phosphorus we use today in agriculture is water soluble phosphate, 1152, S15s, 40 rocks, MESZs. Lots of great options, and they're good products, and they've been around for a long time. Today, Crystal Green would be the first phosphorus-based nutrient option we have that is actually not water soluble. For the most part, it's water insoluble. And so it actually then relies on something to solubilize that bond. And for the most part, that is actually the plant. So we have root activated nutrient release, essentially, when we talk about Crystal Green. That magnesium phosphate bond, my old analogy is, you know, if you took those two elements and you glued them together with Royal Page glue, root exudate, you know, citric acid would actually come along and solubilize that magnesium phosphate bond, and then take that magnesium and phosphate into the plant at the same time. If in fact your phosphate that's water soluble, you apply it to the soil, it will want to form bonds in the soil, predominantly either with calcium in a high pH soil, calcium phosphate, or in low pH soil, it could be aluminum or iron. Those bonds are definitely tighter bonds, so it's tougher for plants to exude acid that would actually solubilize those easily, whereas magnesium phosphate is an easier bond for plants to actually break apart and take those nutrients in. So we call it advanced technology. It reduces tie-up of this important nutrient in the soil and essentially puts the plant in control. The other side of that, especially as we get into, you know, the Midwest or the Mississippi Basin, you know, where we have nutrient runoff issues, you know, the concern of leaching is a lot less because, you know, magnesium phosphate granule sitting in the soil with no root exudate, it can't get away from the soil. It's sitting there, and it's essentially in a non-leachable form. So it's a very stable form of phosphorus that really, in all reality, is only being made available by a plant. And so when we put the plant in control, that totally changes the mindset of how we actually look at phosphorus in crop production. And, you know, I'll go back to when we, you know, how we got involved as Taurus, you know, I'm going to say five years ago, it was actually through research. You know, Ostara was up here in Western Canada looking to do some research on our broad-based crops, canola and wheat. And it was in conjunction with some other technologies we were working with at the time, where we ended up in the same research trials. And so it sparked our interest. And once we got involved, we're like, man, this is an impressive group. You know, they're not just coming to the market and saying, here's our product and go to town. You know, we wish you the best. You know, when we got looking at it, they had already been doing years and years and years of research to understand the fit, to understand the value that this technology can create. And as we sit here today in the fall of 2021, you know, we're now sitting on a database of 14 years of research across a broad marketplace. You know, I think it involves 12 different crops, broad-based crops, and then you get into some specialty crops as well. You get into turf as well. So it is highly defined, you know, the fit it has in agriculture. It is highly defined on the crops that we grow across, you know, Western Canada, Eastern Canada, and then the U.S. And so as we sit here today, it's like we feel, we're always learning. I think that's the beautiful part of agriculture is you have to have the blinders off. You never stop learning. And, the more we have of commercial usage, we're learning about different scenarios, different variabilities. But in all reality, as we sit here today, and as Roland and I have this conversation, it's we're coming from a place of confidence, and as we get into the science, it's a technology that we know works, we know it fits. It's up to us to figure out the dynamics behind the scenes, and that's what we'll get into here as well this morning. But it's a great product, a great technology, something you need to consider, but we're going to come from a place of agronomy to understand the fit in your operation. So at this point, I will actually turn the floor over to Dr. Roland Leatherwood to actually get into the technology and talk a little bit about phosphorus in the soil and the dynamics of that nutrient in a plant and how it all works together. So Roland, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Craig. I appreciate that. Very, very good introduction. For my part of the talk here, I'm going to cover getting down into the details of some of the physiology and some of the soil chemistry that happens when we use phosphorus as a fertilizer. Talk about the phosphorus cycle and the effects that soil pH has on phosphorus as a fertilizer, and how crops respond to different conditions of soil pH and phosphorus availability, and what the result of all those changes are, and how Struvite Crystal Green can play a part in managing your nutrient budget and getting the best out of your phosphate dollars. So the first question to ask is going back a bit and remembering, what does phosphate do, or phosphorus do, in the plant? And one of the most important functions for yield is pictured right here in this diagram. Some of you may remember this from ag classes, plant phys classes, where you're looking at how carbon is captured by a plant, one carbon dioxide molecule at a time, and put together piece by piece to make sugars. And in this cycle, phosphate plays a huge role. You can see circled here is every introduction of phosphate into the cycle. Now, plants do reuse those phosphates, but to get enough of this cycle duplicated billions and billions of times in a cell within the plant in order to create the starches that we need takes a lot of phosphate. And in fact, it takes 36 for each round of this cycle just to make a half glucose molecule. So 72 to make a single molecule of glucose. So that's quite a lot. It's very critical in carbohydrate synthesis. And why is carbohydrate synthesis? Because that carbohydrate gets moved as sucrose through the plant to sink tissues where it's turned into starch, so that here your potatoes bulk, grains fill, that and the sugar content of beets increases, that sort of thing. This is where it all happens. So if phosphate's limiting, then yield will be limited.
I have a question for you here, Roland.
Sure.
It's a common belief in agriculture that we need phosphate early in plant production. If in fact you're showing the Kelvin cycle or the ATP cycle,
right?
Does it indicate then that we need this? You're talking about building starch. Does it indicate that we need this working for the life of the plant?
You need it in two stages.
Okay.
So in general, I'm going to talk generally for all crops here. There are two phases. One is root development. So that early phosphorus is important to grow a strong root system. In grain crops or starch crops, bulking occurs late, and that's where Crystal Green has an advantage because, as you'll see later, it is around at bulking. It hasn't leached away. It hasn't become fixed, so it'll be around when grain filling is occurring, when tuber bulking is occurring, in those later stages of the cropping cycle. So it's kind of a two phases there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So it's so the belief that we just need it early isn't necessarily true. If you're talking about bulking, we need it 60, 70, 80 days into a crop's life as well.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. So that's a little bit about going back into plant phys and biochemistry there. So now
sorry, one more question. If
Sure.
in fact phosphorus isn't available, what happens with that Kelvin cycle?
It'll slow down.
Stops.
You'll just have less of it happening. So you get smaller potatoes. You may not get fewer potatoes, but you get smaller potatoes. You may not get, you'll get smaller test weights on a grain, less sugar content or less size on a beet, that sort of thing.
Okay. So you're slowing down the cycle when phosphorus is limited to a plant.
Yeah. And if it gets very severe, you just stop yield altogether. But farmers going to recognize that kind of shortage. What Crystal Green helps with is that sort of hidden hunger zone where the crop looks fine, but you may be slightly short on availability. And that's where Crystal Green fills in very well.
Okay. Makes sense.
So that's sort of the deep inside the plant. Now we're going to step back to the farm field and the environment a bit and talk a little bit about the phosphorus cycle. So here, a fairly simple diagram of phosphate cycle, just a cartoon here, indicating the paths that where phosphorus and phosphate move through the environment, particularly on a farm, and what impacts that has. And phosphate sources can be weathering of rocks. I mean, we get most phosphate fertilizers from phosphate rock that's then acidulated and processed. That's fertilizers. It can also come from crop residues, not to be underestimated. Also from animal manures or decomposition of animals that are in the soil, bacteria, that sort of thing. Those are also organic phosphate sources. And all of those are available, can be removed from the cycle during harvesting. So we remove the grain, remove the potatoes. So phosphate leaves the field in harvest. But as Craig mentioned earlier, Ostara has the technology to recapture from municipal sources, from farm sources, processing sources. We can recapture some of that phosphorus and bring it back to the farm field. Plant uptake is from mineralized phosphate. And then it becomes organic matter, either in a plant or in soil microorganisms. So that's another source of phosphate there. That organic matter, whether it's from manure, animals, or plant material, decomposes back to mineral phosphate and is available for plant uptake. See that site, there's sort of a mini cycle inside there. But when it's phosphate is mineralized, it can fix, it can combine with either iron, aluminum, or calcium, depending on soil pH, and become essentially agronomically not useful. It can sustain a plant, but you're not going to get great yields. What we're interested in is that solution phosphate that is free for plant uptake, and also adsorbed P that is only slightly bound. You can also lose phosphate to leaching, which I'm sure everyone's quite familiar with. So let's look at the plant root in this case. What happens in a good soil pH condition? We don't have much fixation at all, so that pH is around 6.5, 6.6, and there's plenty of phosphate around. Well, what will occur is here around the plant roots, and here's a big blow up of a plant root. There'll be root hairs. So those very, very fine root hairs, extensions of cells, will seek out and absorb phosphate from the soil just by a simple electrochemical gradient. No extra work that the plant has to do under ideal conditions. Plants will also cooperate with soil microorganisms, mycorrhizae, to extend essentially the surface area of the root way out into the soil. So that depletion zone that can form around a root isn't so important when you've got a healthy soil that has a lot of mycorrhizae in it. It's essentially extending the root system out. And those mycorrhizae do very similar processes to roots, very simple electrochemical gradients to continue the process of absorbing available phosphorus from the soil. So what happens under less than ideal pHs? So let's go back a bit into chemistry and have a look at what occurs to a simple fertilizer under various pHs. So this is the diagram of ammonium phosphate, very simple. Well, under a pH, very acidic pHs, it can exist as phosphoric acid. This ammonium would probably evaporate off. And under very basic, we have tribasic phosphate. Now, those pHs of 2 and 12 are physiologically, we're not going to see those in the field. More likely, we're going to be dealing with dihydrogen and monohydrogen phosphates, so these two here. And those populations will vary by the soil pH. So think of the soil pH being anywhere here from 8.5 to low or high 4s. So you can see in our concentration of the various anions we have here that they're going to vary quite a bit. Some soils are going to have more of monohydrogen, some are going to have dihydrogen. But the point here is the speciation of phosphate in the soil is going to change depending on the pH, and the reactivity is going to change as well. So here, a map of Alberta, soil pHs of the important agronomic regions are laid out here in color-coded. And you can see the range here, 5.5 with this very dark red, all the way to 8 in these deep blue regions. And that's quite a pretty broad range to manage agronomically. And some of these situations are more advantageous than others. And we'll see why in a second. Here's why. So if we are here in this region where we have some 8s going on, we're going to have a lot of calcium fixation occurring, where phosphate applied by the farmer is you're going to lose quite a bit of the phosphate to calcium over time. And also in some of these deep red regions, aluminum is going to be the primary problem with fixation. So that means efficiency becomes lost if you're using something like a MAP, a DAP, a TSP. There's a challenge here. You're essentially feeding the chemical reaction and not feeding the crop like you might want to.
That would be, from our perspective, just looking at, obviously this is one province out of North America, but it does show you the diversity of pH, obviously, even in a defined region, essentially, right? And it's
yes. And I wish I had more maps, but these maps I'm not great with the GIS database system, so I just kind of have to depend on a simple web search. So they're kind of hard to find. I was lucky to get this one.
From a soil test perspective, we've looked at a survey of averages of pH across, call it Western Canada. And I think on average, there's like 65% of our soils were considered calcareous, like over 7.3 pH. And there was roughly 15 to 20% considered acidic, like below 6.4. So,
and I imagine
those two together, and
that's a lot.
That's a lot. It's like 80% of our soils would be, call it prime candidates for, call it crystal green basis, just pH alone.
Yes. And a little later, I will get into a rough sort of desktop look as to why pH actually impacts the cost of what's going on when you apply fertilizer.
Okay.
So that's soil pH. So it can be a friend or foe here. And it can do you a favor, particularly if you're lucky enough to be down here in this sort of 6-6 range where there's very low fixation occurring. So back to our crop. This is a fairly simple diagram again, where we have, let's call it a barley plant or a wheat plant here in ideal conditions. So medium, high phosphate availability. Here, the plant's just going to depend on standard electrochemical uptake. So put out a proton, do a little reaction around the root area and pull in free phosphate. Doesn't take a lot of energy, doesn't take a lot of effort on the plant's part to do that. But under low pH soil or unfavorable pH, every red arrow here indicates a group of genes, a physical process that the plant has to engage in, use energy in to manage the shortage of phosphate, whether that's internal partitioning of nutrient ratios or phosphate uptake to altering root chemistry. So we talked a little bit earlier, at least Craig mentioned citrate or small organic acids that help in the solubility of some of these compounds. That's what the root will turn on. It'll start exuding a lot more citrate in order to try and free some of these phosphates from the soil, either that's organically bound or absorbed or adsorbed or in various ways. So a lot of energy goes into that, and that is the energy the plant takes away from producing a crop and growth. So
that is that like a reallocation of resources essentially, or is it extra energy required by the plant?
It's extra energy. So the sunlight hitting the plant, it's having to use a lot of that energy that it is captured to manage the situation. You see how much more is turned on over here. Yeah. This is called the high affinity. If anyone's interested in the term, this is the high affinity phosphate system, and this is low affinity. Plant's doing a lot of work, working hard at the gym. Plant is sitting on the couch just eating phosphate is a way to think of it.
Okay.
So what happens if you apply a fertilizer that is not water soluble? Well, a couple interesting things. If a plant is in this low pH situation, one of the things that will happen is you are not going to get fixation from your applied crystal green. It doesn't dissolve in water. In order for it to fix, it has to dissolve in water to combine with aluminum, calcium, iron. So none of that happens. Environmental note, there won't be any phosphate leaching. That's sort of a separate discussion for another time, but that's another benefit.
Just to make a quick point there, Roland, leaching typically only occurs if you have a soil saturated in phosphate, essentially?
No.
Okay.
If it's free phosphate, it can leach into dissolved. You can have dissolved phosphate going into drain tile or drainage systems. And it can also leach as organically bound phosphate. That's it gets a little more complex. That's why it's a whole nother talk. So if phosphate is absorbed, which means the one that's kind of held to a soil bed like a magnet, that can be particulate leachate. So that's sort of dissolved solids leachates. And those can be a problem. That's visible, muddy water running off the field situation. So those are the three kinds that can contribute to the environmental trouble.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So let's see here. So no leaching, no fixation. So you've fixed a pretty big efficiency issue here with your phosphate applied. And this is what does it. This is a representation of crystal green. This is magnesium ammonium phosphate hexahydrate, the big fancy name for it. But this is struvite. And that's the thing that's not water soluble and can feed the crop still. So what you'll have is a situation where the plant is in a high affinity uptake condition, but then finds a source of phosphates that the citrate can easily dissolve and easily access. And as a matter of fact, here's a picture of that. This is a photo taken by a former colleague of mine, Andy Owen. And this is turf root. This is turf that they actually germinated on a bed of crystal green. It's that root safe. It's that germination safe. So in terms of canola or crops that are very sensitive to fertilizer burn, well, here's kind of good proof that it's quite safe. And if you look close, you can see right here in the corner is the actual root exudate that is helping this root dissolve the crystal green and take the minerals from it. So pretty cool photo. I think the guys at Taurus have also made some photos similar to this that we'll see a little bit later.
Just a quick question, a couple slides back,
Sure.
Roland.
Sure.
You talk about the left side of your graphic here where it's energy intensive. This would also apply in high pH soil as well, not just low pH soil.
Yes, any condition where the plant is under phosphate stress. Yeah, I know the diagram says low pH soil, but let's just replace that with low phosphate availability. It's going to turn all these things on and work harder.
You bet.
Anything else?
No, that's good. That's perfect.
Good questions. So the soil pH and the crop response, what happens when you use struvite? One thing is you're going to sharply reduce fixation. You're going to improve that phosphate efficiency from crystal green and your overall nutrient efficiency because the phosphate's around, then all the other fertilizer components you've got are going to work better as well. No leaching. The roots of your crop can directly contact the granules, and there will be no worries about stand count. And in fact, for some crops that get air seeded, you may even be able to reduce seeding rates because the crystal green is so safe, you don't have to adjust for known losses. More phosphates available to the crop, particularly during that important grain filling, bulking period, which ends in more yield.
I think that's right or wrong, but we look at our marketplace here in Western Canada. We're coming out of what would be considered a historical drought in a large part of our farming area, and you talk about placement of fertilizer. A lot of it's applied, at the time of seeding, and seed safety is a huge issue today, especially under our high production systems. And I think it's underestimated, the importance of nutrition and safety to a seed, because it's people think it's dead or alive, and I'm saying, well, you might not kill the plant, but you might create a whole bunch of stress with the salt load in itself.
Oh yeah, I have a good story for you there. So this is a time of year where I'm calling all my research sites and asking if they want to re-up. How did this season go and all that? And I have been talking to those folks in the drought regions. And one of the observations I've heard several times about crystal green is the plants were more drought. They handled the drought better. Let's just say that much. I think part of that is due to, when soil's dry, the salt index of the soil solution increases. And so there was less burn happening with the crops that were in crystal green treatments. But also, one thing we see when we do root studies is crystal green promotes a lot deeper and broader rooting. So I think some of those crops actually were deeper in the soil and could find more water. That's something I want to look at in more care and more carefully in the future. But observationally, it was an interesting thing to mention since you brought that up.
Yeah, and I would tell you too, we had that, there's some areas that just, unfortunately, water was the most limiting factor and there was nothing there. But in the marginal areas, we had quite a bit of feedback where, growers were calling us and saying, I think that where we did the crystal green, the crop is hanging on better. It's seeming to be finding its way through that last cycle of 35 degrees Celsius. And that's, so that could play into your theory of root development and water utilization.
Yeah, good. So let's take a slightly different tack here and look at the farmer's desktop. And this, I mentioned earlier, looking at this from sort of a numbers perspective rather than physiology perspective. Let's suppose that you want to apply 150 pounds of phosphate per acre. That's a high rate, but I was probably thinking corn when I wrote this up. DAP and Crystal Green, of course, they have different concentrations of phosphate, but they also, as we've been discussing earlier, work differently. If we assume we get 100% of the phosphate out of that material, there's no fixation. We're going to ignore that for a minute. For the DAP, 326 pounds per acre needs to go down. For the Crystal Green, 536 pounds. So it's like, if we start to consider the efficiency factor, and in some parts of the US, efficiency of DAP is down to 30%. Crystal Green, I'll give it a 95% here. I won't say it's 100% efficient. And rework that math, you can see suddenly things change quite a bit here. You need 725 pounds, accounting for what's going to get fixed of the DAP, but only 564 of the Crystal Green. So here, pound for pound wise, you end up applying a great deal more DAP if you're under a fixation growing condition than you would trying to get all that phosphate out of Crystal Green. Now, it's going to be rare you ever feed all of your phosphate using Crystal Green, but it does show that there's an efficiency factor to think about here, because all of that 28 comes back.
We do have some reference material that would talk to the slide that would be Western Canadian based, and we just look at the year of application. But we were seeing, call it, of the pounds applied, call it roughly 75 to 80% of those pounds got into the plant in the year of application. The remaining 20 to 25% that didn't, it still sits there as Crystal Green, meaning it's not, doesn't get bound by the soil. It's still there to be used by another plant in another year. So
that's correct. And we've seen that in alfalfa trials as well, that we've done with the folks at Guelph.
Okay. So the consistency of utilization after year one still holds true then? You're seeing that?
They did a rate trial on alfalfa, and it was clear even after 3 years, you could still see the rate of application effect, and they were still getting a good yield on their alfalfa out of it. So it will stick around.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up a little bit on this sort of detailed soil chemistry and physiology look of Crystal Green, some of the benefits, the results you're going to see, no losses from Crystal Green phosphate due to fixation or leaching because it's not water soluble. Importantly, the crop will determine the availability, not excess rainfall or temperature or anything like that. And also the crop growth. So I have here crop driven release. And what we mean by that is as those roots grow, as the canopy closes, there'll be more roots. So the plant will have more opportunity for uptake. Here's a canola root. This is Mike Dolinsky with Taurus took this picture. Here's a canola root mining that prill. The more roots around, the more prills they can mine. So there'll be no phosphate shortage for that plant. In the end, that means more phosphate per unit of Crystal Green applied is available, and your overall phosphate efficiency is improved for the crop. And then in the end, increased plant stand and seed safety as well, not to mention yield. So go ahead.
Yeah. Would it be fair to say if a plant root finds phosphorus and it's not toxic, it'll proliferate? Is that what we're seeing?
True. Yes.
Okay. So in the case of Crystal Green, it starts from a point of not being toxic. It never was. So when it finds it, it's going to proliferate and send roots to that prill or granule like we see in the pictures here that Mike did. Yeah.
Right. And DAP and MAP TSP can't do that. The reason being is they're highly soluble. So that dissolution means they will put a really strong osmotic stress on the plant root. That means it'll pull water out of the plant and just kill the cells. Or there's so many ions around, it's toxic to the plant. It'll blow up the membranes and kill the root.
Yeah. Until the salt dissipates away, essentially.
Correct. Until it dissolves a bit. And is spread out in the soil solution.
Yeah. So it's funny. It's what the plant needs, but initially it's very tough for the plant to use it because of the salt.
Right. And in other parts of the world, in the United Kingdom, they use Crystal Green as a starter fertilizer, and they use it only as starter fertilizer. They don't mix it with anything. So that's kind of an interesting approach, but it's one they are comfortable with and they're successful with.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Let me hand back to you, and I'll look forward to questions at the end.
Yeah. Well, perfect. I appreciate the agronomy and science presented there, Roland, and I think that's again the thing that's attractive for us is there is science here in play. It's not just a fly-by-night product that actually, it's got a great story and people can get excited about it. We're leading with the science of how it fits, how the science of phosphorus works in a plant, the impact of phosphorus in the soil and how intricate and challenging it is to get that nutrient out of these various soils that we work with across a broad base of cropping systems. To a point, I would say when we first got involved, how we think as agronomists and people in agriculture, we want to tie it to a crop, and everybody's like, well, what should we use Crystal Green on our canola? Because canola is the cash crop. Maybe not in 2022. All crops are cash crops, and we're like, yeah, let's do that. That makes sense. Let's not worry about wheat. And in all reality, the more we got involved and the more research that we've seen, it kind of started to, basically pave its own path of saying, well, it's not really about a crop per se. It's actually more about the soil. And when you have a soil, like Roland explained, that can make life tough for phosphorus, that essentially is where Crystal Green can bring additional value. So high pH or low pH combined with low phosphorus levels, typically those goes hand in hand. That is where we tend to see Crystal Green being a better alternative for a plant because it isn't no longer fighting the soil. I mean, that's the first time I've seen that explained the way Roland did by looking at the amount of energy required by a plant to actually get that nutrient out. If Crystal Green makes it easier, then there's more energy to go around for other things to fight stress. Plants are constantly fighting stress. But if all that energy is going just to try to extract nutrients, maybe there's not as much energy to go to fight other stresses that actually come their way. So interesting way to look at it. I think for us too, I think it's one thing we got to, we're talking about corn in the Midwest. You maybe have 130 days to grow a crop here. Typically, most of the crops in Western Canada, we're looking at 90 to 100 days to grow it. And yet, understanding the importance of feeding that nutrient all season long, right through to filling of the crop, is something I think does get overlooked. That's why I asked that question up front, because it's, we think we need phosphorus to start. But when we talk about finishing and filling, if phosphorus is all already bound and tied in the soil, then how does that impact the finishing of those plants? And that's where I think this mindset of it's still there, plants can still extract it. We are seeing a better finish, converting that energy into compounds that actually produce and fill grain. So, a deeper dive, but in today's world, high prices for crops and high prices for fertilizer, I think you got to understand the intricacies to actually get the most value out of your cropping systems. So for us, we have predominantly, we've introduced it as a part of a phosphorus strategy. So as we see here, the combination of some water-soluble phosphorus early to get that plant going, and then in combination with Crystal Green to give us that season-long feed-in, has researched very well. It's showing us that, as part of a phosphorus solution, they work well together. And, basis agronomics and economics, when we tie those two together, that is where most of the applications are happening today in commercial usage. In saying that, we do see more growers that have built comfort move to a higher percentage of Crystal Green in their programs, especially where they really understand their soil and they know phosphorus tie-up is real. We have gone from 25% inclusion to 35 to 50, and we even have some growers that are moving towards 100% of their phosphorus is Crystal Green, and still seeing success. We still say you gotta make sure that you have a strong, healthy plant, because your conversion of magnesium phosphate to phosphate into the plant is totally reliant on that plant's ability to exude acid and remain healthy. If it's not, chances are it won't do a good job of solubilizing Crystal Green. So other ways to address phosphorus, keeping that plant growing and healthy, if you're going to a straight Crystal Green strategy, is something that we would recommend. So when you look at your farm, I'd say the easiest spot to start would maybe not think about the crop, like I said, start with a soil test. If you've actually, and I would tell anybody in the market, fall of 2021, if you're not soil testing, you're leaving a lot to chance, because we're coming out of a drier bias. Even I'd say some of the best growers I know, because of the year we've had, they have had some really poor crops and some really good crops all in the same farm. And so the importance of a soil test is critical. See what you have in the bank for nutrients, not just phosphorus, but all nutrients. If in fact your soil test is coming back and saying you have a soil pH, as Roland mentioned, call it at 7.3 or higher, or 6.4 and lower, those are probably the areas where you say, well, tie-up starts to become a bit of an issue, either calcium on the high side or aluminum or iron on the low side. Then we look at the level of phosphorus. Typically speaking, if you're higher pH or lower pH, we tend to see lower phosphorus levels in the soil as well. You add those two together, that's the basis for where we'd say, well, maybe Crystal Green is going to be a good fit. The value proposition is easier to define, because we know phosphorus tie-up can be more of an issue. As I said earlier, when Roland was going through that slide, from what we've seen in Western Canada, that would account for about 80% of all soils fall into that category from what we know. And that doesn't even talk about seed safety. So if you actually then are worried about seed safety, even if you're sitting at a pH of 6.8, you may think, well, Crystal Green might be a good fit, because we're just burning our seed. We're killing 40% of our seed before it comes out of the ground, or we're putting a tremendous amount of stress on our cereals. We're killing 2 of the 5 seminal roots before it even gets going. And so even in those situations, say, well, let's try to keep the plants as healthy as possible. And if we're overloading it with salt in a dry seed bed, we're bound to set ourselves up for stress or death before we even get going. So yeah, as mentioned, every market's a little bit different, but for us here, predominantly most of our phosphorus is applied with a direct seeding implement, an air seeder. You're putting it on or with the seed or in a side band. That is a great spot to put Crystal Green. If in fact you're seeding with a planter, where we have corn and soybeans, you say, well, how am I going to use Crystal Green? Well, we say, it still makes sense. You have the option to apply in the fall, but we would recommend, banding it in so it's actually in a defined zone where roots can grow into it and proliferate, or a spring band application. And we are seeing that on soybean ground or corn ground. And there's a lot of great research on both of those crops, especially, as we get into the Midwest. There's some tremendous data coming out of the Midwest on corn. So it is still a fit, but we do say you got to actually get it into the soil. The only crop where we actually see it in a broadcast is probably potatoes, or where they can actually broadcast and hill it in. So you're still incorporating it into a rooting zone for that plant, and it works very well on potatoes in that application method. As we sit here in the fall of 2021, as you know, the fertilizer market is absolutely crazy. And I don't know where it will turn and go the other way, but the demand for Crystal Green commercially has been extremely strong. I think part of it is we're now 3, 4, 5 years into commercial usage. Have a lot of growers that have had a lot of experience trialing it themselves, splitting fields, trying it on different crops. And, that in itself is, we're just seeing growth happen in pretty much all those situations. We have seen an increase in production capability from Ostara. But I would say if you're considering it, and you're going to watch this presentation, and we're going to have a live Q&A part as we get into October, I wouldn't wait too long. The demand continues to outpace supply, it seems. And even with the higher price, I think what you need to look at is cost per pound of P into the plant. And when we look at Crystal Green in that fashion, and we say on an average year, if we can get, good growing conditions, not in a drought, but good growing conditions, get 75% of what we apply into the plant versus, say, monoammonium phosphate or a water soluble source of phosphate where we might get 20 or 25% into the plant. We would argue your cost per pound of P into the plant in the year of application with Crystal Green is the most cost effective and the most efficient, which should drive additional yield or production. We have 3 options from a sizing perspective. The 90 SGN and 150 SGN is what comes right out of the reactors. So whether it's coming from Wisconsin or Madison, Wisconsin, or Chicago, or Atlanta, or Saskatoon, the prill itself that's produced in the Pearl reactor, they can pull that out at in 0.9 millimeters, 90 SGN, or a 150 or a 1.5 millimeter. We do sell that. That is a direct usage. It can't be blended with other fertilizer. If in fact you wanted to blend it with S15 or 1152 or 40 Rock, then you'd have to go to the 300 SGN. That is actually a bigger granule that's actually granulated in Florida currently, with plans to actually continue that on with granulation in St. Louis moving forward. So those are your 3 options. But I would say as we sit here today, all 3 are pretty tight in supply. We hope to have some additional production as we get into the winter months. But definitely, if you're watching this, reach out to one of us. Today we're not showing you a bunch of research slides, but either go to our website, Taurus.ag, or directly to Ostara's website, and there's a tremendous research data set that we can leverage to understand or hopefully answer some questions you have on a specific crop that you're looking to grow for 2022. But in all reality, I say it's more about the soil. You figure out your soil, you'll figure out whether Crystal Green is a fit or not, because every crop you are thinking of growing is probably considered a high value crop for 2022. I mean, the return on investment equation that we would have done 3 years ago, it doesn't apply today, because all those crops are double in price. And yet if they went back to where they were 3 years ago, the economics still make sense. That's where we started. So with that, thanks for taking the time to view this webinar presentation, whatever you want to call it. We will be following this up with a live Q&A session on October 21st at 9 Mountain Time. So depending where you are in the country, we will be having a Q&A with Roland and myself, maybe another guest. We'll see what happens between now and then. where we can actually dig in a little deeper. If you watch this and you got additional questions, that's where we will open the floor and hopefully give you a peace of mind or get some additional agronomics covered off to ensure that you best understand the science and the fit for your operation. So anything else, Roland, on your end?
No, I think that covers it well. I look forward to some good questions and conversation on the 21st.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thanks for watching, and we look forward to connecting with you virtually in a live format in the coming weeks. Take care.